First of all, I want to welcome everybody back. We've all had a little time off, had some time to relax, and we're back to talk more cool Final Cut and tech and Mac and stuff like that. First of all, we have some regulars. Peter's here. Hey, Peter.
Hello, nice to see everybody again.
Great review that you did last week. We'll talk about that more later. Mr. Messman, it's always a pleasure to see you. You still in Pennsylvania?
I'm still in Pennsylvania. I'm actually an official Pennsylvania resident at this point. It has happened.
Are you actually like voting in Pennsylvania? Are you that much of a resident?
I'm working on that. It's we know how the mail-in thing is kind of going these days, so it's we're segueing into that, but I can get a ballot now, which is exciting.
Well, you know what they say: vote early, vote often. And Felipe, how you doing?
Doing well. It feels like it's been like 2 months since we've connected here. So I'm looking forward to be talking.
I think it's because it's been about 2 months.
Ooh, really?
Right. No,
this year is a crazy one.
Yeah, it is. And then Larry O'Connor, we've never met. It's a pleasure to meet you. And Larry is from OWC or MacSales.com, which, by the way, I want to thank you for sponsoring this show, keep helping us keep the lights on, and paying for all of this. Also, this other guy, Mr. Wiggins over there, he writes some great plugins for Final Cut 10, and they can be found at FX Factory, but iDustrial Revolution, that's where we find all of that. So thanks everybody for doing that. Really appreciate it. Larry, we've never met. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having us on.
I've heard some stuff about you and just your passion for the industry. Can I ask how did you get into what you're doing now?
I had an Apple. I needed more memory, more for it, and ultimately found the local service options were just not all that great. They took a lot of time. They were expensive, and the big thing was, when you learn and come to understand that these so-called complicated upgrades get done in about 5 minutes, take less time than the paperwork took, let alone the fact that you've driven it in and somebody tells you, who's at the time not doing anything, that you got to come back in 3 days to pick up your system. I was really kind of excited to share that with other folks. And the timing was such that there'd just been an earthquake, or had recently been an earthquake in Asia, which messed up, semiconductor prices across the board. That was a short-term thing, but it observed in the Apple market, everybody was very quick to really, raise the prices up high. And then when things normalized, they kept them there. So they come in, not just show people how to upgrade and tell people, I can virtually hold your hand, and walk you through it, but also offer a really competitive cost outside of Apple and outside of, at that time, the current channel players, and give people a fair price and pull that curtain back.
And I can't remember who told me. Resources. I'm sorry. I can't remember who told me, but as I recall, you got into doing this at a pretty young age, right? I don't know if that's part of the story, but I always find it interesting when you find somebody who finds something that they enjoy and they dive into it, head first.
It was fun. Once you crack the case and start to see what's inside, there's endless opportunity and possibility to make these systems better. And again, show people what they could do with them, as opposed to being trapped in that, time to buy a new one, kind of cycle.
Yeah. Well, as we know, the computer industry never stops, which is good and maybe bad. But today, what we really want to talk about is the next in the marching forward, if you will, of Thunderbolt technologies. What do you want to tell us about Thunderbolt 4?
Thunderbolt 4 ended up being a lot more confusing than it probably had to be. But first and foremost, it's super important to start with. Thunderbolt 4 does not obsolete or really even technically replace Thunderbolt 3. Thunderbolt 4, more than anything else, is more of a marketing position, and really applies to the PC world. And I say it applies mostly to the PC world in the sense that up until Thunderbolt 4, if you bought a Type-C Thunderbolt PC, the specifications, weren't necessarily all the same machine for machine. There's a lot of different variables should say variables, variations in how Thunderbolt 3 could be implemented on a PC. On the Mac side of the fence, and this is super important to know, we have everything that's important already on our Macs. Now that Thunderbolt 4 now promises will be present on a PC. Prior to this point on the PC, you didn't know if it was going to could support power delivery, if it was going to have all the video capabilities, if it was going to be 40 gigabits. There were different options in how Thunderbolt 3 could be implemented. And back with the chipsets, you could have a Thunderbolt 3 enabled machine that still needed another piece of hardware to fully enable that capability. On the Mac side, we've got it.
Larry, we may need to dial back just a touch there and start a little bit.
What I'm hearing is our current Macs are actually Thunderbolt 4 compatible. No?
That's a, how do I say?
Accurate,
Thunderbolt
but not
4
precise.
compatibility is the wrong, is really, but and there's, again, how it's been messaged and how all this stuff has gone out, there's been, the sands have been shifting, but the reality is, Thunderbolt 4 is you call it a new feature set. I mean, we have a new chipset for on both the host side as well as on the device peripheral side. Just like when Titan Ridge came out, on the Mac, when new chipsets come out, for any Thunderbolt interface, there's typically it's an update required, on the software side, sometimes on the hardware side to support that chipset. Goshen Ridge is, I mean, it's Thunderbolt. If you want to call it, it's Thunderbolt 4 because it introduces a new feature, and that's the hubbing. We can't today use Thunderbolt 4 devices, or really, I should really clarify, Goshen Ridge devices on our Macs. But that's certainly, like Apple is a Thunderbolt partner. There's no way we're not going to see that, obviously, in the future. But it's Thunderbolt 4. I guess
the question is, would you be able to plug in a Thunderbolt 4 device that was coming out into a Thunderbolt 3 Mac?
Once there's support, when Apple chooses to support Goshen Ridge on the Mac, on our Macs, the short answer is yes. But it's not Thunderbolt. But it's a Thunderbolt 4. It's Thunderbolt 4 in name. It's another interface. When I say chipset, I don't want to be deep in the weeds. But the fact that we're on PC right now with Thunderbolt 4, adds a lot of. I see there's a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of how do I say, misdirection would be the wrong word, but it's a situation we didn't expect to be in.
Well, we've got an hour.
Macs. I guess it really, I can't, I know I'm not answering the question as directly as, you want me to.
I understand. Felipe, you have your hand up. What's up?
No, yeah. So maybe this will help clarify. Is Thunderbolt 4 compatible the same way that Thunderbolt 1, 2, and 3 are if you are on a higher level, on a higher number Thunderbolt? For example,
downward compatible,
I have a Thunderbolt,
right.
Yes. Thank you. So I'm on a Thunderbolt 3 Mac now, and if I want to use a Thunderbolt 1, I just need an adapter, so it's compatible. It's gonna read that. Is that the meaning that you have between a Thunderbolt 4 device and a Thunderbolt 3 computer? Is that you're just gonna lose maybe bandwidth?
No, Thunderbolt 4. Check off all the boxes. Thunderbolt 4. If you look at the specs. Again, I wasn't answering directly, in terms of is Thunderbolt 4, are we going to be compatible? Thunderbolt 4 on a computer is simply promising what capabilities will be there. And those capabilities, which are 40 gigabits, check that box for Mac, dual video, dual 4K, or up to a single 8K with DP 1.4, check that box with Mac. The ability that, the daisy chain devices do power delivery, provide power out, use a power device to power your laptop. All these things are already there. We already have everything. So to say Thunderbolt 4, Thunderbolt 4 is not a big leap over Thunderbolt 3. And no, it's the same cable. Thunderbolt 4 cables are already backwards and forwards compatible. That's the cool thing, just to go into a whole other area about Thunderbolt 4. And I'm jumping off to kind of a different, piece on this?
No, it's good, because here's the thing. You know way more about this than anyone on this call and really anyone watching. So just go.
Thunderbolt 4 cables are going to be a godsend. Right now we've got all those freaking Type-C cables out there that do different things. and they all look the same. And you know, Thunderbolt 3 cable, if it's active, for example, won't support USB above USB 2 speeds. The USB Type-C cable, of course, you know, doesn't work with Thunderbolt. In fact, the USB-C cable that comes with, you know, your Mac power supply, you know, if you try to use that to connect a dock or a device that actually, you know, runs bandwidth, it's technically just a USB 2 cable for data, and it doesn't work. But they look the same, and people make assumptions. Thunderbolt 4 cables will work with everything at full bandwidth without limitations. So you'll be able to buy a Thunderbolt 4 cable, and you can use that to connect Thunderbolt 3, or, well, you can use it, let's say this, you can use it to connect to Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4 computers. On the device side, you know, people ask the question, you know, as soon as Thunderbolt 4, you know, became public and it was really starting to be talked about, people asked the question, actually they made the statement, geez, you just released the Flex 8 as an example. I mean, that came out in June. We guys say, that's awesome. And then they also follow that up by saying, but geez, you know, it's too bad it's not Thunderbolt 4. And it's like, but you don't understand. Thunderbolt 4 doesn't replace Thunderbolt 3.
Well, I think it's kind of understandable why people are confused, because the jump from 1 to 2 was, you know,
10 to 20
was clearly different.
Yeah.
2 to 3 was clearly different, you know, including the cable. So a couple things I'm taking away from this. Number one, it sounds like even if you plan on buying no devices, everybody wants to take all their old cables and just throw them out and buy a bunch of Thunderbolt 4 cables, because now we can swap them, it sounds like, whether it's USB or Thunderbolt or power, right? Is that what I heard you say?
Correct.
All right. I'm
Just Type-C
getting rid
to
of all my
Type-C.
cables.
Yeah, if it's Type-C to Type-C and you have a Thunderbolt 4 cable, and our cables will say Thunderbolt 4 and 40 gigabits on them, you can use that with everything. Even the upcoming USB 4.0 that's 20 gigabits. Anything that's
Okay,
Type-C to Type-C.
Felipe, hold on one second. One more point of clarification. You said, Larry, a couple times, as soon as Apple chooses to support it, will it be like an OS update, or is this full support will come with additional hardware like Apple Silicon or whatever? It sounds like you're talking about an OS update to fully support it, no?
Yeah. Thunderbolt 4 is not new hardware. I mean, it really isn't new. I mean, there's a new chipset, but we've had new chip. We went from Alpine Riz to Titan Riz, and we've had Goshen Ridge is another Thunderbolt, you know, series. How do you say? It's another 40 gigabit Thunderbolt chipset. It's not a brand new feature set. So to answer the question about hardware, new hardware is not required to take advantage of what Thunderbolt. We already, I mean, again, what I'm really trying to say is we already have on our system, on our Macs, and it comes on the PCs as well. We've already got, depending upon the machine you have, the capabilities that Thunderbolt 4 now simply standardizes and promises a user is going to be on that PC. Tiger Lake, fully integrated Thunderbolt, and fully integrated, you know, it now delivers everything. There's not any optionality in terms of what features a PC maker may or may not have chosen to provide. Now, when Apple, for sure, I mean, I just don't see any other way. You know, just like when Titan Ridge came out, I mean, we had to go to, you know, Titan Ridge is only supported on, you know, more recent OS. I mean, an OS update, a certain OS level is required to take advantage of Titan Ridge chipset-based devices. I mean, that I'm sure will be the same case with, you know, Goshen Ridge, but this is not a hardware, you know, this isn't brand new hardware required for it. We already have what Thunderbolt 4 is simply now promising across the board.
So it might be closer to a firmware update that's kind of required for Macs to support some of these devices then.
I don't, you know, that's you know, I can't answer that question. And in fairness, I mean, for anything that's Thunderbolt 3 today, you know, Intel released guidelines that show, you know, compatibility with previous Alpine Ridge and Titan Ridge based hosts.
Felipe, you're chomping at the bit. What do you want to say there?
No, I just wanted to say that Thunderbolt 4 is basically cleaning up the mess that USB created with 3.1, 3.2, Gen 1, Gen 2. Thunderbolt 3 is basically a one protocol to rule them all, then.
Sort of. Yes and no. On the PC side, it guarantees that your PC works with all these things. On the Mac side, again, we've already got this stuff. USB is its own thing. And USB is trying to clean up. I mean, we had 3.1 Gen 1 and 3.1 Gen 2, and now suddenly we're 3.2 replacing that. And I was like, why did it change? I think, no, it's just a new number. I mean, USB, I mean, I thought Thunderbolt was going to avoid all these stupid number games, so to speak. But unfortunately, now we're here talking Thunderbolt 3, Thunderbolt 4. And, this is the first time that a new Thunderbolt release really hasn't meant, a leap in, a major feature set. And it's really it's not a bad thing, but it does clean up the mess on the PC side. I mean, if you're working with Macs and PCs, the compatibility between the two, or device, I should say, the performance and the experience moving the device from a Mac to a PC, it can be very inconsistent just because of different firmware, different implementations on the PC side in terms of how Thunderbolt is set up. And we've got devices and it's painful because you get a customer out there that says, well, this device I have works perfect. And then I plug in, this other device and I only get 40 megabytes a second. And we say, well, there's a firmware update and you have to, I have the latest everything. I mean, they argue because the standards haven't really been there. There were different ways the hodgepodge is the wrong word. I don't want to be, I don't want to be negative on how the PC side did it, but Apple as a controlled ecosystem has kept Thunderbolt 3 extreme at max feature set and always updated, with the latest. So when there's new devices being certified and released that require some change, when Apple pushes an update, those changes are taken care of. On the PC side, it's really up to the user, and it's been painful because supporting Thunderbolt on the PC, for the most part, it's pretty smooth. But when you run into those corner cases, or you run into a situation where the user doesn't understand that Thunderbolt on a PC doesn't always mean it's full 40 gigabits, with all the bandwidth you need to have a monitor and a drive running through a single port, it's difficult. It's been a challenge. But Thunderbolt 4, as a marketing term on the PC side, that host interface setup, it simply guarantees all the features that we've already enjoyed consistently on the Mac will now be present on every PC that has Thunderbolt 4. I mean,
Larry, one of the things I think I heard you say in some of the stuff is that one of the features of Thunderbolt 4 will be the ability to make better port replicators. Is that one of the features of it?
The Goshen Ridge chipset for the first time, and Goshen Ridge really could have been a Thunderbolt 3 device. I mean, again, it's Thunderbolt 4 mostly in name. It's the next step in terms of Thunderbolt capability. But yes, our Thunderbolt 4 hub is the first opportunity where you can now plug many Thunderbolt devices or more Thunderbolt devices from a single port instead of having a daisy chain and have all those units in a big long string. You now have the ability to use our hub and plug in, from one port, go to 4 more. So that's a nice advantage. And that's something I know that has been looked for, since, the first Thunderbolt Max, a decade ago. And by the way, Thunderbolt 1 and Thunderbolt 2 are also far more similar, than most think. I mean, they both had the same bandwidth. It was just a matter of opening up the channel so you could get 20 gigabits both ways.
So to kind of simplify some of that, what it sounds like is basically on a core level, now, whether it's on Mac or PC, you will be able to, instead of having to daisy chain, you can have multiple ports on a dock, for instance, and you can just go and this is basically, it doesn't necessitate multiple devices. You can get tighter in there. So that's one benefit. And then on the other benefit, you should be able to get similar bandwidth between going from Mac and PC now, whereas on the PC side, it used to be all over the map in terms of performance. Now it's going to be standardized similar to the Mac experience for Thunderbolt. So you should now, in terms of going between a Mac and a PC, what should your expectations probably be with a Thunderbolt device? For instance, taking a dock or a drive from a Mac and bringing it to a PC if you plug in from one going into another.
The same experience. And again, right now, you don't necessarily have that unless you have a PC, unless you're buying a PC that you verified and read the fine print to make sure they've implemented everything. It may work great on the Mac, and then you plug into the PC and either performance or certain functionality could be missing with a Thunderbolt 3 PC. With Thunderbolt 4, the way it works on the Mac will be the way it works on the PC, the way it works on the Mac. I mean, it will be the same experience in terms of how that device performs and the capabilities that are available, no matter which of the two platforms you connect to.
So to further simplify it, basically, it sounds like we're going from, for Mac OS nerds out there, leopard to snow leopard, essentially, when it comes to Thunderbolt.
Yeah, and with a couple, again, the bell and whistle, again, and this could have been a Thunderbolt 3 device. Goshen Ridge is a Thunderbolt chipset, is what gives us that hubbing technology. And the hubbing technology is, again, that's exciting. I mean, now, again, bus power devices, you got to have that at the end of the chain, or where you potentially lose performance, or you can only have one. Now, hey, you can have 4 bus power devices, off a single port, with the hub. I mean, you don't have to have those crazy chains of, ThunderBays where you got 6 of them, strewn out now, and you maybe need to pull one in the middle because that's going to go to a different computer after whatever transfer. Now they can sit on their own ports and be moved for and be controlled far more effectively.
Felipe.
So is there, I have 2 questions. Is there now a standard on how cables need to be labeled in order to be identified as Thunderbolt 4? And the second question is, will we be seeing Thunderbolt docks coming from OWC that has multiple Thunderbolt connections?
Yeah, we already have our hub out, which is just a hub and a USB port. And that's 4 Thunderbolt ports from one, plus it gives you the USB connectivity. And we absolutely will have Thunderbolt 4 docking solutions that, in addition to the more Thunderbolt ports, will also give you some of the other ports, the USB ports, audio, card readers, and such. So we will integrate that into a dock, which for folks that have a lot of Thunderbolt devices, going to be a good thing.
Peter?
We've got quite a few questions. I think people are very excited about the cables, the fact that, it's going to be one cable for everything now. And as you'll read in the review of the Flex 8, and we'll talk about that a bit later, I fell foul of the fact that I had it connected via a USB connector and it wasn't working. And then I suddenly twigged, maybe I should use the cable that came with the box. But that's a different story. So, are Thunderbolt cables out, Thunderbolt 4 cables out there now, and can people use them?
Thunderbolt 4 cables are just now getting, they're going through final certification. Actually, there is a cable in final that is certified that's actually shipping with our current product, and more cables will be. It's going to be another, few weeks before Thunderbolt 4 cables start to become available. Okay. And as far as labeling, every Thunderbolt cable's got the little Thunderbolt, that lightning bolt on it, which
but the Apple one only has the lightning bolt on it, and some others have the lightning bolt and the number 3.
Certainly. I can't speak to what Apple's going to do with how they label their cables. Our cables, do say Thunderbolt TB3. Our Thunderbolt 4 cables are going to say TB4 and have 40 gigabits on them. So they're 40 gigabits and TB4. And every Thunderbolt cable, even the current cables, are certified, are power certified for up to 100 watts, which is something you also can't count on with a lot of.
Which is another point, because there are cables that are Thunderbolt 3 at 20 gigabits, there are Thunderbolt 3 that are 40 gigabits, and then the length also has an impact on that. And there is actually a great question here from Karen asking if we're going to have a drop in speed with longer cables on Thunderbolt 4, or if there is any advantage that Thunderbolt 4 brings with the length of the cables.
Sure. Thunderbolt 4 has a different chipset availability in terms of what we can put in the connectors, whereas we've been currently limited to, about 0.7 or 0.8 meters for a passive cable that can do 40 gigabits before having to go to active cables that get a lot more expensive for the 1 meter and 2 meter lengths on Thunderbolt 3. Thunderbolt 4, by January, we'll be shipping Thunderbolt 4 passive cables that are up to 2 meters. And later, Thunderbolt 4 supports up to 5 meters in these passive cables. And every cable that's Thunderbolt 4 will be 40 gigabit. There won't be any 20 gigabit, any half-speed passive cables. If it's Thunderbolt 4, it will be 40 gigabits no matter what the cable length. And I guess I can caveat in there, and this is just how it is. Now, at peak performance, we have measured in cables, and this is just a distance. This is just physics. Nothing you can do to get around it. The longer the cable, technically you do lose, a little bit of speed, but not like, the bandwidth still stays at technically the 40 gigabits as opposed to, and I don't even want to issue, I shouldn't even say that because I would just confuse the heck out of everything we're trying to cover. The long and short of it is a Thunderbolt 4 cable will always be 40 gigabits. There won't be this passive and active and well, I can't say there won't ever be active cables, but there won't be a passive cable's this and an active cable's that, and a passive cable over a meter or a meter up is slow. And
Ghost ham.
So if I had to put my LumaForge hat on for a second, and when the biggest issue we always had was Thunderbolt networking and things along those lines and running some of that. Now that you have the longer cables in place, I heard up to 5 meters or so. Does this mean that, well, first off, are there any changes to a Thunderbolt networking side of things? Is there anything does this become more viable now? Because now that you can connect in a work group, for instance, multiple things, and you have a 40 gig essentially cable versus what 10 gig is the standard, what kind of doors could this possibly open from a networking side of things?
Well, it certainly gives you the distance that you're seeking. I have to say, it's funny you put it on your LumaForge hat. Luke, on our Jupiter side, I mean, we had a kind of a meeting last Friday just to talk about what this Thunderbolt 4 is all about. What it means that we're Windows right now, we're waiting for Apple, and he also just threw his arm and just cheered that, hey, Thunderbolt networking takes a big leap forward. I mean, the cable length and the consistency, absolutely positively. So it certainly gives you that much better flexibility and better opportunity to take advantage of networking, especially with the hub where potentially you don't have to have limited ports. You're not necessarily having to give up, half of your ports or a quarter of your ports just to do networking.
And do the Thunderbolt 4 cards on the PCI side now possibly become a possibility? Is that even a thing? No. Okay, so that's not going to be. We're not going to see those for any.
Is that a bandwidth issue?
It's a processor. I mean, it really has to interface, on a processor level. I mean, again, I can't speak to the DMA and all the, the low level aspects, but a PCI card into a PCIe slot, I mean, it would be an adaptation of I mean, it just doesn't work that way because it doesn't work that way. I mean, Thunderbolt gives you PCI lanes over cable, and it has to be. I mean, that's integrated at a low level on the system. Adding that, any system that has PCI cards on the PC side, that's because they had Thunderbolt built into the system's already got it built in, and you're just adding the card to tap the capability. It's not a Thunderbolt standalone card. There never have been Thunderbolt standalone cards.
Well, that was always a question I had, which was, why couldn't you have a you always had to buy the 10 gig adapter, right? That was going to go, that would be the side adapter for the 10 gig to Thunderbolt. Whereas the Mac devices were always, you could just plug in on the Thunderbolt side, but now it seems that you have the 40 gig connectivity. I guess my question is, when you deal with, and not to totally derail the conversation, but when you have NICs and things like that are adapters that are really just PCI cards inside a standalone box, but you have the 40 gig connectivity, what is the reason that you couldn't just have a Thunderbolt 3 to Thunderbolt 3 operate the same way a 40 gig or 10 gig card might? That was always the question that we had.
You're talking about on a networking basis?
Yeah.
Technically you can, and people have.
Well, because I think on the Mac, it's never quite been viable where you've been able to sort of do that. You've always had to have the separate device, except internally on the Mac.
Well, the QNAP does that. The QNAP, you do a Thunderbolt 3 from the QNAP to the computer, and it does Thunderbolt Ethernet over Thunderbolt, and right. you get about a little over 10 gigabit connection on that connection there.
But the problem always came on the server side, which was having multiple users and having that work in the same way the Ethernet protocol would across multiple devices. That was always the issue with the Thunderbolt networking side, where you would the central nervous system of the server would always be a problem because you couldn't quite get it to operate the same way that a traditional NIC card would.
I'll be honest, we haven't done a whole heck of a lot with Thunderbolt networking. We've seen some cool sites, mainly schools, that have set up really elaborate and functional Thunderbolt networks. But this is, in terms of the practicality for what you're discussing, what the needs are, the bandwidth for production. I'll be honest, say that's something I can't speak to, other than to say, from a cabling point of view, the cable side at least gets a lot better with Thunderbolt 4, with the Thunderbolt labeled Thunderbolt 4 on the cable side.
The cable side was always also the biggest reason that with the Thunderbolt networking broke down, is because you would only have a 3-foot cable, which if you're going to have a work group of Macs connected, that always broke down by having the computers not being able to be far enough apart. now that you have these cables, this becomes significantly more viable. So anyway, sorry, we can return to earth now.
I actually have one more question about these longer cables. Can I use these longer cables with Thunderbolt 3 devices?
Yes.
Well, that's enough right there.
Yeah.
That's like a huge.
Again,
Right?
Thunderbolt 4 more than anything else. I mean,
It's the cable. It's the best cable on the planet. It works for everything, and it's longer.
Could not agree more.
I need nothing else. I need nothing else from my Macintosh.
Right. I mean, again, Thunderbolt 4 is more a market. I mean, it's a feature delineation more than it is something that's a brand new technology. Every Thunderbolt chipset, every Thunderbolt, how do I say, step forward is added new features and capabilities. And Thunderbolt 4, they mainly, again, this is more on the PC side of the fence. They need to have a delineation between this stuff's all, been kind of, I mean, they could have just done, hey, Tiger Lake and later with Thunderbolt 3 is going to be everything Thunderbolt 3 ever promised, but calling it Thunderbolt 4 puts a line in the sand so the consumers on the PC side know, which I should say, so that they do know on the PC side rather, that this really has everything. If it's Thunderbolt 4, I'm not going to plug something in and be disappointed with how it operates. I'm not going to plug a display into it and have it not work. And of course, the cables for us, we get to take advantage of all these great things. The cables are not, the cables aren't tied to a chipset. So the cables are independent, and when it comes to the devices, there's no doubt in my mind that it won't be, it can't be too much longer before we see support for Goshen Ridge.
Okay,
and
this
really
is great.
excited about
So Thunderbolt 4 sounds awesome. Now we've sort of hinted at the next thing I want to talk about here.
I do have one more thing. You're going to go to the Flex.
Okay.
I really want to supplant what I've said about Thunderbolt 3. Thunderbolt 3 is not obsolete. Thunderbolt 4 and Thunderbolt 3 work together. The Thunderbolt 4, gives you, technically, I guess you say makes Thunderbolt 3 better because now we've got these cables that are universal, longer. They'll be cheaper than the active cables that we've got available today. We have the hubbing technology that, soon I'm sure we'll see universally available on Mac and PC. And in terms of chipsets, Goshen Ridge is adds hubbing. In terms of for other performance things, and we can do docking with it because there's enough bandwidth that we can split off to do docking. But the only way we could build a Thunderbolt, the Flex 8, which I mentioned earlier, the only way we could build a Thunderbolt 4 Flex 8 would be to put a Titan Ridge chipset in with it, a Thunderbolt 3 chipset, because Goshen Ridge doesn't support the capabilities that Titan Ridge does for data. Goshen Ridge is designed for hubbing. I mean, that's its primary purpose, hubbing and docking. And it actually, the way the lanes work, there's only one lane of Thunderbolt we even get for other devices, for other connectivity. 3 of those lanes, just the way it has to switch, have to be reserved so that it can support the additional Thunderbolt ports. You still get 40 gigabits for Thunderbolt ports, so let's not confuse that it's only one lane split off. But the bottom line is we could build a Flex 8, but then the storage on the Flex 8 and the PCIe slot on the Flex 8 and the CF reader, everything that's in that massive solution would be limited to a single PCIe lane and call it about 1,000 megs a second. Actually, less than that.
Perfect segue. So, by the way, you had me at 15. You had me at 15 meters. What I want to talk about now is Peter's article that you posted last week?
It was
on the website.
Week. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that, Peter.
Well, I'm very lucky to have a loaner of a Flex 8. In fact, it's right next to me here. I won't move it because it's all connected and I don't want everything to go black. But it's a pretty good box. I mean, I'm pretty impressed by it. It plugs with one Thunderbolt connector into I've actually got a 13-inch MacBook Pro because I decided to downsize a bit. So it plugs into that, it charges it, and I've got 24 terabytes sitting right next to me, which is split into, it's 24 terabytes of hard disk as RAID 5, and then it's got an SSD as well in it that all accessed via the one cable. It's got ports on the front, USB, some slots to put your camera cards in. Then on the back, it's got a couple of Thunderbolt ports, one which charges the laptop, as I said, and a display port. But at the moment, I'm using the loop out of the Thunderbolt to go to, I've got a LG 27-inch Thunderbolt monitor that works really well off it. And I mean, I'm going to be sad to see it go, actually, because I've got very used to being just plugging one cable in and having access to everything. I've got an Ethernet cable plugged in, so what we're doing now is going through the box. And the only connections I've got to this are my headphones, the connection to the Flex 8, and I'm actually going in with the my Canon camera on another port because I ran out of ports.
Peter, one thing I think for at least the Final Cut users out there that I think is a good distinction about this, we've been using this a bunch on the We Make Movies side as well. And actually the Mixing Light guys have been using it for Resolve specifically. But for this particular thing, how would you recommend people use the libraries versus the media and segmenting those across the SSD versus the standard drives?
Well, I quite like the version I've got here. I mean, you can order it with all hard disks or, the mix or just the chassis. But because I've got the SSD through Thunderbolt 3, and Larry might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm getting about 2.4 gig off the SSD to my MacBook Pro, which means...
And I think you've got the U.2 SSD in there, right? So you've got one of the high end. So Larry, actually, you might want to explain this differentiation. There's standard SSDs, but then should people look at a U.2?
U.2 is I mean, the simplest way to look at it is it's an NVMe format, whether it's your M.2 or U.2, you're using, effectively, it's not PCIe, but it's a PCI direct connected NVMe, high performance drive. SATA is limited to 500 megabytes a second. The Gen 3 U.2 or M.2 PCIe drive, NVMe drive is 2,800 megabytes a second max performance on Thunderbolt. I mean, it maxes that. It's actually over 3,000 megs a second. Gen 4 goes to 4,000 megs a second. So simplest put, SATA, 500 megs a second, a single U.2 drive, you're hitting close to 3,000 megs a second. Much faster, and the costs have come way down on these as well over the last couple of years.
And so specifically for Final Cut workflows, and what Peter's sort of referring to is having your library and cache separate from your media, which is where those high performance tasks happen in Final Cut, and being able to put those there versus the standard bandwidth that you would use for your media, which is going to take up a larger portion of the data on a disk. This is optimal.
Yeah. I mean, I have to confess that when I edit normally with Final Cut, I have the cache on the desktop because it's fast. And then at the end of the day or the end of a session, I just trash the cache. Yes, I know things disappear, renders and everything like that. But with this, because the cache is actually on the SSD, I can unplug my MacBook Pro, plug my iMac Pro in, and the thing wakes up as if it's been connected to the box for a long time. It doesn't have to regenerate the renders and everything because the cache is stored on the SSD, which I think is a huge advantage. So if you're a Final Cut Pro 10 user, the combination of having the 24 terabytes or whatever you want of 7 disks in RAID 5 at the moment and the SSD is for me, it's a really good combination and really works well with Final Cut because look, you know what Final Cut's like generating waveforms. The thing just kind of like hammers it, when trying to generate waveforms, and you adjust the zoom on the timeline, and you hear the discs going. So the cache is great to have on there.
So, and what we probably haven't done for people who don't know what the Flex 8 is, actually, it is a 3-in-1 box. It is essentially the equivalent of a large Pegasus type drive or something, but it also has a dock and it also has a PCI card slot for it. So for instance, a sample configuration is you might put a U.2 essentially NVMe large startup drive disk in slot 1. You might put the other 7 drives into a RAID 5 or so for most of your media, 4K media. And then what you might also do is take an AJA IO card, put that in, and you can run out multiple displays, 4K displays, and possibly do surround sound audio out of that while you're using the dock functionality in that configuration for any peripherals and things that are going to go. So it's really designed to handle multiple use cases all in a single box that you would use as an enclosure. And the nice thing about this too is you can even use older drives that you have from other boxes, so you can get the enclosure on its own and kind of build this out to your own specifications, or get drives up to, I think it's 128 terabytes or so that you can fit in this. If you do all 8 drives with 14 terabyte drives or so, I think is the max.
That was 16, and the 18s is, you know, that'll add another 16 terabytes. And one thing I'll let out of the kind of a preview, kind of just, you know, let you know what's coming. Now, the Flex 8 is designed for, you know, ultimate flexibility in how you configure. And, you know, what you need today may be different from what you need tomorrow, and you can update and change things, you know, as you need to. And in the very near future, you know, we're going to effectively have a Thunderblade that fits into a single bay of the Flex 8 that will give you that sustained, you know, really high performance up to 2000 megs a second in that one bay while having seven other drives. So lots of flexibility, whether one SSD is fast enough or you need an array of SSDs. You know, the Flex 8 is today, tomorrow, you know, whenever. It's there for, you know, to be flexible for all those needs.
Yeah.
But and the other use case I'll throw out that is actually being very common, and the Mixing Light guys were doing a lot of this, is you can have a 4-drive enclosure for some of this, and then you can use one for the cache and some of that, as we were discussing, and then the 3 others can easily be for DIT specific purposes. So you can use those as shuttle drives, shuttling to and from set that are coming in and out, and they have the Helios enclosure from OWC as well. But they also have an LTO product. So you can assemble a lot of these things. If you have a laptop, for instance, you can have your IO card, 4-drive disk, and a U2 cache on the DIT side. Then you can also use the Akidio Node Titan from another Thunderbolt bus on the other side of that for DIT specific tasks. So if you were a high-end DIT, this becomes a really powerful laptop enclosure that essentially would allow you to do anything on set. Specifically from that, you can even be backing up to LTO on that with a few different peripherals that can go on either side of that enclosure. So this becomes, for high-end professional workflows, kind of an all-in-one box. And then you can also kit out a laptop to very, very impressive performance without much additional effort.
So, and I'm at the risk of being the dumb guy in the room again, I just want to clarify that what I think I heard you say, you said. The Flex 8 has 8 bays. What you're telling me is I could take and assign 4 of those, maybe 6 of those, to be arrayed, but a couple of those drives are removable and won't affect the RAID. I can pull those out to shuttle data back and forth to the set. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, you can remove all of the bays, right?
Understood.
Now, the question is how you would want to set up the RAID for different use cases, right? So you might have a 4-bay RAID that you would work in there if you're a DIT. Now, you would need to configure that, but then you would have the other bays how you would want to use. The second it's become rated, you're going to break it if you unrate it and re-rate it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think some healthy use of white tape on those drive doors once you open the front would protect you from doing that.
They've got some really good screws on there that you know, they just don't pop out.
Oh, okay.
But conceptually, yes, Chris, you can do all of that.
And you know, one other thing, if you're not sure which drive your RAID belongs to, Soft RAID will actually, it'll flash the lights on the drives for each RAID set, individual drives or entire RAID sets. You know what is what. So
very cool.
And Soft RAID is the software that goes with the Flex 8 from OWC, which you might actually want to explain for some of the people, because some people may not be familiar, Larry.
Yeah, give me a pitch on Soft RAID, Larry.
You know, Soft RAID, you know, first off, I will say, I know there's people that absolutely are married to hardware RAID. You know, we believe Soft RAID is better, and the Flex 8 you can replace this. It comes with a SATA controller. You can put in a hardware RAID for SAS and SATA. So the Flex 8 is already ready to support hardware RAID. But using Soft RAID, you get exceptional performance. You get exceptional flexibility in terms of, you know, with a hardware RAID, you get an 8-bay box. All 8 drives are going to be RAID 0, RAID 5, whatever they are. They're all one set of drives, and that's it. With Soft RAID, as Sam was noting, you've got the flexibility saying, I want these 4 drives to be a RAID 5 for, you know, a redundant volume where my stuff ultimately gets deposited. I want these other 3 drives. I want those 3 drives to be RAID 0 because that's going to be my high-speed editing space or my dedicated editing scratch. I've got, you know, I'd say drives of different types. Especially if I'm using drives that I bring into the equation. What about, you know, failure protection? A hardware RAID, I can tell you right now, first off, by the time a hardware RAID sounds an alarm, you probably already are having problems because they're pretty well dependent on smart. The other side of hardware RAID, to say drive fail monitoring, at least what we've noticed, a lot of the time the drive has died, and that's when it tells you that it's time to replace the drive. It's not because it's having problems, even failed smart. It's because it no longer is showing up, to the controller, and it's telling you, well, there's a drive that's bad that needs to be swapped out. Software does predictive, I guess you could say predictive analysis, and watches the drives. And if it starts to see something that's getting out of whack, way before you start to have problems, way before smart would ever even say that there was a problem when you ran a smart test, software will come out and say, hey, there's a drive in your system, and it'll tell you which drive that maybe has 2 months or 6 months before we're predicting that it's going to start to either really fail or outright die. So that while things are still working, you can, and with the comfort of planning, swap things out. The other awesome thing about soft RAID, drives do fail at some point. We can't say they never fail. Drives fail. I don't care. Whether it's Hitachi or Seagate or Toshiba, whatever you put in there. At some point, hopefully it's way past and it's way down the road. But at some point, everybody's had drive failures. Soft RAID, when you need to rebuild the RAID, soft RAID supports RAID 5. Soon's going to have RAID 6. It allows you to hot swap in a new drive and still have access to your data. We of course recommend you should always have backups. You should always, first and foremost, heaven forbid another drive fails, while you're rebuilding. But the cool thing about soft RAID, you don't have to give up access to your data for hours or days or sometimes a couple of weeks, depending on how big the array is. But while it all rebuilds, soft RAID will intelligently rebuild, while you're still able to read and write to the other drives. Certainly, that can be important if you're in the middle of a project and you've got a drive that's got to be swapped out. So it does all sorts. It's hard to really tell, but the biggest thing with soft RAID is you've got that flexibility of how you align the drives, how much capacity you use in each drive, and it even optimizes, for outer track use. So that in cases where you are doing an editing, if you're sharing the same storage you can do multiple RAID types on the same drives. So if you're going to keep all 4 or all 7 or all 8 drives in that system, and they're going to be dedicated, you're not worried about pulling them out for swaps, you could have part of that set, part of the capacity of those volumes across all 8 drives be a RAID 0 volume, and part be RAID 5. And
I've never heard of anybody doing that. That's really cool. And I don't know if that's unique to the Flex 8 or if other RAIDs can pull that off, but it's an interesting
only RAID pulls that off is soft RAID. And soft RAID, we've been shipping soft RAID 5 now for about 6 years. Soft RAID goes back, it was born it was born out of EMC in the 90s. And came to the Mac, and I think it was around 96, 97, the first version of soft RAID became available for Mac. It's also, which is a real benefit, you don't have to install a driver on the Mac to access soft RAID volume. Soft RAID already has the driver included with Mac OS. Now, to get the full benefit and the capabilities in the rebuild, you need to own soft RAID, but you're not locked where, geez, I've got a soft RAID volume and I can't see my data unless I get soft RAID and get it on my computer. You have full read-write access to soft RAID volumes, even without our commercial product installed.
Okay, next thing I want to talk about briefly here is I understand that OWC was involved in a documentary recently. What do you want to tell me about that, Larry? And what was your guys' involvement in it?
Sure. We really excited to have been involved with Kiss the Ground. We became aware of that project. It's about a year ago, and there were a stage where they needed some help, and we happen to have obviously a pretty good array of hardware, and it was something that we felt we could get behind in terms of really investing ourselves into helping see that come forward. That project had been going on; they've been working on it for a few years. It was time to get it wrapped. The timing actually is really good to get it wrapped up and completed. It was accepted at Tribeca. COVID kind of threw a whole bunch of things off kilter related to that. But all the same, it's you hear all these. Look, I grew up in the country. OWC was started in Woodstock, Illinois. If you look up, actually, technically Marengo, Illinois, which is out there. It's not as far out there today as it was 30 years ago. The city, continues to move out, of course, but nonetheless, I mean, it's country, it's cornfields, it's soybean fields, it's nature. And Kiss the Ground, presented a solution, not requiring some, it's hard to make people change. People want to change, but it's difficult. I mean, we have, things are set up to work a certain way. I guess you could say it's hard to, we can make individual changes and throw away your water bottles. I hate water bottles, get a reusable.
By the way, Larry, I think you may need to brief everybody. Kiss the Ground is actually a movie specifically about taking the carbon that is in our environment and trying to get that back into the soil, and how this can be a practical approach. And it's on Netflix. It came out to Netflix in the last week or two. I got to go see the film and sort of talk to the filmmakers and some of that. So it's a pretty amazing environmental documentary. And so I wanted to kind of set that stage around what the documentary is, and that it's now on Netflix and everybody should watch it, because there are practical approaches to the environment. Despite what many people might tell you that it's hopeless, there's actually a lot of things that can be done currently to go combat a lot of the stuff we're seeing in the environment if we would actually just do it. So this is a great primer on that. And now, Larry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I say, okay. I mean, that's, you're right. I mean, we hear about all the villains out there, carbon and cows for all practical purposes, but we have to take a look at how things work. And Kiss the Ground really, in a really easy, entertaining and easy to understand way shows, hey, we've got this farmland, look what happens, with the way we're treating it with pesticides and fertilizers, separation of, livestock from their food sources, and what that's done on a macro level. And I say macro level, you grow up in the oceans and the rainforest, the lungs of the planet, and you look at where does, we hear the ocean, of course, is where a lot of our rainfall comes from. Vegetation is responsible for 40% of our rainfall. When we till massive plots of land, every farm has its own microclimate. Put them all together, they're macroclimates, and you have desertification, where viable land, literally turns to desert. And this has happened for millennia because of what farming ultimately, what it does to it, the erosion that it causes. And something that we didn't know, and I can go on and I'm trying to summarize. I mean, there's so many, the movie does a great job. It's about an hour and a half. It's an awesome watch, and it gets you saying, wow, not only can we improve, can we start to sequester more carbon, we improve the quality of our food, we improve our water. I mean, that's something that really didn't go deep into, but off the coast and certainly near Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, you've got areas that have become ecological dead zones because of fertilizer runoff.
And some of this, some of this, to interject, is the core. One of the core ideas of this is that you can take land that, as Larry was saying, is desertified, and by having something that's not a monoculture, in terms of how that farm is set up, you can take that land that has become a desert and completely revitalize it and revitalize the soil, get the carbon dioxide to return to this. And some of this, if you want a companion movie, there was a movie called Biggest Little Farm that actually you can watch for free on Hulu, where my recommendation is watch Kiss the Ground to understand the science side, and to see the human side, you can go and watch The Biggest Little Farm. And sort of as a companion, you can get the idea of the difference between permaculture and monoculture farming in some of this. And literally, if everybody just started putting this in practice, we would change the world. It's just what it is. There's much positive things that can be done, and really this is about education, so that we have hope instead of anxiety, frankly, around a lot of this, because we can direct that energy in positive ways.
The amazing thing to me, I just got to put this out there. The amazing thing to me is, and this is common sense. I mean, way before we farmed anything, the Earth was a big, lush, green, carbon-rich planet. And the amazing thing to me is the biome that's beneath the ground. When you let all this stuff grow and you don't constantly, till it up and kill it, that's what fertilizes the ground. That's what makes the ground rich. It's more than just the earthworms. It's, fungus and bacteria, amoeba. I mean, it's all these microorganisms that actually work together symbiotically. And that's why our ground is fertile. And keeping ground cover also eliminates topsoil loss. We lose unbelievable amounts of topsoil every year. And that's, I mean, reversing that is a lot harder than, bringing ground that still has good topsoil, bringing dirt back to life. And dirt that's alive sequesters unbelievable amounts of carbon naturally, not just cost effectively, while it's producing calories that can feed us all. And for farmers, the inputs that have been required to farm today to produce to have the same caloric output per acre, or I want to say it's at least 4 times greater than it was 50 years ago. And that's because we've killed the ground. I mean, we've pesticided the crap out of it. We become dependent on fertilizers. And fertilizers are, they're used up with a monoculture crop every year. But you let that ground regenerate, you actually let it come back to life and grow on it right. That diverse cover, with your crops, it actually provides, call it natural fertilization, keeps that land healthy, keeps the topsoil down. It reduces temperatures as well. It reduces temperature extremes and the average temperature above that area. It increases rainfall. And for a farmer, the cost of inputs, is driving family farms, out of being family farms. And regenerative farming, in addition to all the benefits it has for carbon sequestration, in 10 years, it could actually bring back down the carbon load that we've got to levels that will have an impact on global warming, on global temperatures.
And it also brings the
1%
bees
a year.
It brings the bees and species back, because the bees can, and all of these animals, they have a diversity of crops and things that they can now, and so you get entire ecosystems to come back when you do this way. Like there's so much that's documented on things being burned down, but there's very little, for instance, that you hear about on how you can literally fix this. So another thing I'd recommend anybody out there to sort of start doing some research is regenerative entrepreneurship. And there's entire communities around this technology. I literally have a thing in my basement where we're pulling salads off the wall based on, indoor and vertical farming. So there's all of these technologies that are emerging where, like, you have farmers. Right now we have soybean and corn farmers where you have all these subsidies and all of these things that go into basically directing farmers in entire, sections of our country to farm incorrectly and do things wrong. With technology like this and things like this, like, you could actually solve many of the economic problems that we're facing in this country around farming and all of this stuff. So truly, like, everyone, please watch this movie, because it's, I don't know if you all have noticed, but society has gotten very negative of late. And this is something that is actually extremely positive and is actually there existing, that actually people just need to do.
I have one particular, 2 questions that are burning on my mind. One, Larry, and it sounds like Sam possibly, did either of you actually get to meet Woody Harrelson, and are his eyes really that blue? I just need to know.
No, I have not. COVID kind of put a damper on some of those different events. So at this point, no, I have not met him. I think I have not. No, I've not met him. I've not met him up close and personal.
I don't.
To be honest, Chris, when I saw the trailer, I thought you were narrating it to start off with.
Yeah, no.
There you go.
Anyway, that brings us to about the end of our hour. Peter, is there anything we missed out on? Anything we skipped over?
I think we covered a lot of ground. I think we're all quite excited about Thunderbolt 4 and Thunderbolt 4 cables from looking at the comments that are going on.
I think I might be more excited about the cable than Thunderbolt 4. Yeah, I think that's awesome.
Well, as I said before, I made the mistake of trying to plug the Flex 8 in with a USB cable. And, you do that once. Well, knowing me, I'll probably do it twice. But, you do it once, then you realize, yeah, it might be the same connector, it might be the same looking cable, but they're not alike. So I think the fact that we're moving towards Thunderbolt 4 is good all round. And also, being able to have the box slightly further away. So, it doesn't make a huge amount of noise, but there is a bit of noise. So to have it a bit further away would be good.
All right. So Peter, thank you and iIndustrial Revolution for putting on this show. And Larry, thank you so much for all the support that you've given for us. I think we're all going to be checking out the maxsales.com, looking for those cables and devices, and go check out the Flex 8 if you haven't seen it. Peter, are you ready to announce where it's going when it leaves your
Not really.
studio there?
We're still working on it. The only thing I do know is the fact that you're getting it last, Chris.
I promise you, once I get it doesn't leave my office.
On the basis that it doesn't stay there. We're trying to organise where it's going to go to next, to do something slightly different. What I didn't manage to do is I didn't manage to put a capture card in, because the first one I found was an old.
I read this in the reviews, like 15 millimeters too long.
It was too big, and then believe it or not, I was looking for a light bulb, and then I found this, tucked, which is a Blackmagic one, which would have worked perfectly. But I'll leave that for the next destination, so they can do something different with it.
All right.
But to be able to have all that in one box, broadcast output out of it, storage, and be connected by one cable is pretty amazing.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again, Larry. Really appreciate your support of what we're doing here, and been a Mac sales fan for a long, long time. So thanks a lot.
You're welcome. I appreciate that. Thank you.